The point of our life is to discover the truth about ourselves. This is exactly what Confucius was saying when he wrote that the object of the superior man is truth. So in our Gnostic studies, when we talk about the truth, we're always pointing inside, in our mind, in our heart, within our soul. And what is true is emanating not from external phenomena, but what is true is always something deeply within ourselves. We often think that the goal or purpose of life might be something to do with success, prestige, or education, or bettering our situation, or maybe something like leaving a legacy behind for our family, perhaps making our parents proud, fulfilling some ideal. Some of these things that we strive for are better than others. Some are more noble. Some are more superior than others. But the point of these studies, the point of the teachings that we're giving, is to discover the truth within ourselves. And everything else comes after that. If we place anything before that discovery, before that inquiry, before this pursuit or enterprise of discovering what is going on inside of ourselves, then everything else that we strive for ends up being flawed, being stained by our own misunderstandings or faults. So to place anything in front of discovering yourself, knowing yourself, is the proverbial putting the cart before the horse. Because it is yourself which you strive for anything. If you're trying to achieve something, you're doing it with yourself, with the vehicle of you. And if you don't know what you are or what is going on, then everything else you try to do will have a problem. You'll leave your signature, your mark of all your flaws or misconceptions, misunderstandings. When we talk about the truth, we're talking about something inside of ourselves. And this is also what Confucius really meant. A lot of times people think searching for the truth is something outside, searching for how the events actually unfolded, what really happened, what was truly said or done. But all of that is secondary to what is going on inside of ourselves. So these are Gnostic maxims. Socrates is famous for saying that the unexamined life is not worth living. And he's depicted in this painting pointing upwards, because that's a symbol of the truth. While he takes the hemlock, which is his own poison. He's been sentenced to death. So we say things like, know thyself, which is nothaisioton in Greek, or in Latin, nocete ipsum. And all the ancient philosophers agreed with this, that if you don't know yourself, you don't know anything. Because everything that you experience goes through yourself. Everything that you strive for, everything that happens, is happening through yourself. It's like driving in a car, but you've never cleaned the windshield, and you're trying to get somewhere in the car. You can't see actually where you're going or what's happening. And it's the same thing with our mind, with our psychology. So some of these Gnostic maxims are not new, they're ancient. And part of the problem with talking about them today is that a lot of people try to search for their truth, to search for their happiness, their bliss, and they do it in a very superficial way. But we're going to see what does it really mean to know ourselves, both from a standpoint of day-by-day living our life, and also what does that mean in our practice of meditation? Because for us, without meditation, you really can't discover certain things about yourself. Because if you don't pay attention in a particular way about what's going on inside your mind, you can go through your whole life and never find out what's really happening. And you'll never really find out why you might feel unfulfilled. You might have an idea, you might blame a person or blame a circumstance. That might give you an excuse, but then you'll find yourself blaming another person and then another circumstance. And the only common denominator of all of them, of course, is our own self. So all of these times when we're looking outside for why didn't I really get what I wanted, or why did my enterprise fail? Why didn't I really achieve what I wanted to? It's so easy to find the closest person or situation and place the blame on that side. That's what we're paying attention to externally. In our studies, we want to take a look at what's going on inside, because then everything transforms. Now, along with these Greek philosophers, there's often the talk about 4 basic states of consciousness. And Plato talks about them in his dialogues and his writings. So we have some Greek words here: Eikasia, Pistis, Dianoia, and Nous. And any or most, introductory type of philosophy courses would talk about this. The problem is, most of the time when you hear this type of information, they've really lost the main essence. Because most people today, particularly intellectuals and academics, believe in a very narrow understanding of what consciousness is, a very skeptical, limited understanding. They believe that consciousness emerges from brain cells and neurons. And if you believe that, then what the possibilities are of consciousness is completely tied to a brain, and a structure inside the brain. So they'll base all the commentaries kind of on that foundation. This leaves us with an extremely impoverished understanding of what these 4 states of consciousness actually are. So starting with the lowest form of consciousness, we have Eikasia, which we're pointing towards as dreaming or delusions. The word Eikasia means, more literally, it means imaging, imagination. But in this sense, a negative imagination. We often talk about the positive aspect of imagination and creativity. But this type of imagination is inferior. These are our subjective dreams, our nightmares, all this chaotic, confused wanderings, a vague darkness of what's happening in our dreams. And then sometimes it's very clear what happened, but when we get the clarity, what we see is something very vile or violent or scary, or frightening. Having nightmarish experiences, whether it's some type of demon chasing us or it's just an experience of some tragedy unfolding in your life, where the people you love are dying, or your house is on fire, or there's a tidal wave coming. Very frightening events. So Eikasia is related to that level of consciousness, which is we're not cognizant of it. When we're in that, it's happening to us, but it's still coming from somewhere. It's still coming fundamentally from or through our own self. We just don't recognize that situation. We become identified with those events. We don't remember ourselves in the dream. We don't normally awaken when those events are happening in our dream. We take them as literally happening. And only when we wake up physically do we have some type of perspective that was actually a dream reality. But Eikasia also exists when we're awake, physically awake. This is all of the periods of time when we really have no remembrance of ourselves, and particularly when we're driven by instinctual urges and we're completely asleep. The type of mentality that can form very quickly, like in a crowd, like a mob mentality, where normally people are very, maybe more or less rational in making decisions that are more or less rational, and suddenly a mob mentality can take over and everybody's consciousness sinks into those inferior fears, those instincts that can end up harming others and creating violence. And normally we think, that wouldn't happen to me, but that level of our consciousness is very powerful. And if we're not familiar with ourselves, very quickly those types of instincts and urges can take over. And people wonder how they ended up doing something terrible. So Eikasia is related to these very subjective, asleep fantasies that have really no reality. And beyond that, we have the word pistis. Pistis can mean different things, but in this context, it's more related to beliefs and opinions. Commonly associated with the vigil state. I put it in quotes here, though, because it's not a very good way of completely understanding this. Normally, we're often in a state of pistis when we're physically awake and going about our day. But the reality is, we're not totally awake. We're mostly still sleeping. We're in a sort of identified state. We don't really see things rationally. We're just sort of reacting. And we are reacting in accordance with our beliefs and opinions. Very subjective things. So commonly, this is what we'll see most people, most of us, are at this level, constantly reacting and interacting at the level of pistis, beliefs. And all these beliefs that we have that normally, unless we do special work on ourselves, we don't even recognize we have them. Many things to do with our culture, many things to do with our religion, tradition that have not been questioned. What does it mean to be polite versus not polite? Completely is variable throughout the world, and this is because it's just based upon just history, random accidents. That this part of the world believes it's polite to do this, and another part of the world is polite to do something else. But we will can get very offended just because someone acts in another way. So pistis is where we find most of our self-identity. In the state of pistis, we have some level of coherency, meaning our self that we carry throughout the day is more or less, we're able to get up, get ready for the day, go to work or go to school or do what we have to do for the day, and we have a continuity. We're kind of moving through life. Whereas the state of Eikasia is very much more chaotic and almost unknowing of oneself. Eikasia is very much like a sleepwalker, where even if you were to try to talk to them, like if you get extremely intoxicated or drunk, people just totally forget themselves. They don't know what happened, and they don't even know how they got from one place to another. Because when you intoxicate yourself in that way, you're submerging yourself to lower levels of consciousness. And what's left is just this state of Eikasia, wandering around. Part of the reason why it's so difficult to understand these states in a practical way is because we normally have a very simplistic understanding of what our inner content is, what our mind and what our soul is. We kind of think of ourselves as this simple object that's either, maybe it's in Eikasia, but then later it's in Pistis, and later it's in Dianoia, as this whole sort of solid object. In reality, we're more like a jar full of water with different elements in it, and at the bottom there's this mud and muck. And as you go towards the top, it might get cleaner or more transparent. But really, there's all these different levels in there. And you could almost imagine like when you have oil and vinegar or oil and water, they separate in different levels, right? But we're that whole jar. The reality is we have a tremendous amount of it being in Eikasia, less of it in Pistis, a very small amount in Dianoia, and barely anything related to Nous, which we'll get to. So the reality is, even when we're in the state of Pistis, there's still a tremendous amount of content or activity happening within ourselves related to Eikasia, which is our unconsciousness. And that bubbles up or kind of emerges like a crocodile out of the waters up into the state of our consciousness that we sort of perceive. So we may have a very unconscious reaction to somebody, and just not like somebody, but the state of Pistis just says, "Oh, I don't like that person. They're not good." They form a belief about it. So the belief is just this thin wrapper around a really instinctual motivation. And we have the convenience of thinking we really understand why we don't like that person, but really it's this more instinctual level. Many people will spend almost their entire life no higher than Pistis, with maybe very few times being in the state of Dianoia. Because the demands of life, for most people, don't require to be in the state of Dianoia. You can have a successful life in terms of making enough money and having a roof over your head and things like that, success in this world. The state of Dianoia is really where we begin to have some semblance of objectivity, some semblance of being rational. People who are in the state of Pistis always believe that they're very rational. We always believe, but it was particularly just that, a belief. State of Pistis is the state of groupthink, the state of wanting to be in a collective, to be protected by being in a group, to being in a herd, to being, I'm part of this group or I'm a part of this group. Political group, religious group, cultural group, where we grew up, the people that are around us, being that part of that group. Tremendous amount of feeling of self, feeling of safety emerges from that. But really it's a state of Pistis. It's a state of just believing in it. I believe in the group because that's the group I belong to. There's not a tremendous amount of rationality about that. So all the states of mind that have to do with us versus them, the states of mind that want to protect oneself against the others, fundamentally based on fear and fundamentally rooted in Pistis. And if you observe your mind, or if you look at most of the conversation and dialogue, particularly what's on the media, you'll find it's all about these groups. And what group are you in? And can you be in this group or that group? And who's attacking us? And how do we need to bolster our group and defend ourselves from the other group, the enemies? So the state of Dianoia is extremely different. To truly be establishing yourself in the state of Dianoia means you have to recognize who you are within that group. What parts of yourself, this self-identity you have just been sheaths or clothing that you have just acquired from the groups that you've been a part of. And what part of yourself what have you actually examined? Because with Dianoia becomes a revision of beliefs. So Dianoia begins by revising everything about yourself. Everything. And questioning it. More than that, that questioning is coming through self-cognizance. In other words, a state of remembering oneself or observing oneself. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is you're aware that when a strong emotion appears in you, you're aware that it is just your emotional state. And that what you are fundamentally is not just an emotional state. It's a remembrance that when you have a strong belief or some theories, or you have some idea in your head, some thoughts, that the thoughts do not totally encompass who you are as a person. Because normally when we have thoughts, well, who's the one who thought them? Normally the thoughts are already there. They're coming because they're just there. We don't know why they arrive. We might have some beliefs about it, but we think about stuff, right? We think about stuff most of the time because there's something going on that's bothering us, or there's something that we want to achieve something, and we're trying to put the pieces together, trying to lay out the pieces and be rational about it. To understand by breaking things up and putting things together how life is actually working so that you can be better at being a parent, be better at work, to get the things that you want. Maybe sometimes it's very selfish, maybe sometimes it's a very good cause. Well, often what we do is that when we have these feelings that we don't like or don't enjoy, we can end up using the intellect to justify why it's good that we feel that way. Or we can use the intellect, like we have a feeling that we don't like, and we could find a reason. We can, point that reason at a million things in the world. It's very interesting about that. We reflexively like to find the source of blame, or this is why I feel this way. But it's very superficial. Maybe there's someone in your life who's very annoying, or they are causing problems. Superficially, you can say that's the reason why I'm annoyed. But what do you do with that? The only option you have is to try to get away from that person, or to force that person to be different, or to blame that person. The reality is, okay, they're annoying you, but you don't know why that person annoys you and this other person doesn't. You don't really know why. You might say, well, I don't like that person, I do like this person, but that doesn't get you any further either. You have to see what's coming up within yourself. And it's usually something you wouldn't immediately recognize. We like to think of ourselves as generally good people, but what's coming up is something rather ugly. And to look at that, to see that, that's a revision. That's a beginning to revise your beliefs. It's not just a cold intellectual analysis of what you like and don't like. It's really looking at yourself and not immediately accepting everything that arrives within your attention. All right, so you immediately sense that you're angry. Right? What do we normally do? We'll normally find a rationality. Well, it's because they did that. I asked them not to do this, and they did it anyway. I've been wronged. And we might be satisfied with that in the immediate sense. But in the long term, that type of repetition, it doesn't change anything. And in fact, a lot of people grow resentful, right? Because they keep having that feeling, they keep blaming the other person doesn't change, so now you kind of turn the crank again and you become a little bit more resentful against them. This happens all the time. And because we don't really understand how to change ourselves, we don't know how to really enjoy or love that person, we literally don't know how to be compassionate and sincere and joyful in the presence of this other person. So the only thing we're left with is just to blame them and be resentful. Part of that is because we haven't been taught how to change ourselves, how to go into ourselves and really go deep. Because if you believe that you are fundamentally the thoughts that you have, and if you believe that you're fundamentally those emotions, you'll always cling on to them. You'll never abandon them. You have to abandon them. As much as your thoughts and feelings tell you what and who you are, they're also extremely superficial. It almost sounds hurtful to say that, but when you begin to examine yourself, you'll see that one day you feel something very strongly and the next day you don't. So what does that mean about our food? What does that mean? It means that there's not a lot of substantial truth related to those emotions. So we shouldn't be placing our truth or ending our search for the truth inside that emotion. Likewise with the thoughts that are arising, which many times we can't even stop the thoughts that are coming up. We think that's who I truly am. Not necessarily think it that way, but we're captive to it. We don't know what else to do except just, like I said, turn the crank on those thoughts over and over again. We don't know what else to do. We're trapped in them. That's partly because we haven't been really reflecting on what's deeper than that. No one really talks about it in common dialogue of what's deeper than the brain and thoughts and feelings. Not very many people have a good idea about that. Moving beyond Pistis into Dianoia is a work of self-reflection, becoming aware of ourselves. And this awareness is the principal thing we need to grasp onto, is that there is awareness. I am aware of these thoughts. I'm aware of these impulses, these feelings. Just like you're aware of the television set. You're not the television set. You are aware of the television set. You are not the thoughts, but you are aware of them. The thoughts came about, your thoughts have something to do with who you are, but they are not what you are. Likewise, your emotions have something to do with your life and what you're going through, but it's not who you are. It's not what you are. That awareness to really deeply remember, to keep attention on the fact that there is this play of thoughts and emotions cascading in front of you. To focus in on that, you begin to realize deeper and deeper that it is your awareness that is what you are. That awareness itself brought to the maximum slowly pulls all that energy away from your thoughts and emotions. And just like climbing to the top of a mountain, you finally climb above the tree line and you climb above even the clouds. You can finally see with tremendous clarity. Where before you were just in the woods. You couldn't see anything but the trees in front of you. But to get to the top of the mountain, it's not easy. People say, well, I try to meditate, but it doesn't really work for me. The reality is, you have to be very persistent. What would you tell somebody who said, oh, I tried to run a marathon, but I just couldn't, it didn't work? Did you practice? Did you train? Did you get a trainer? Did you figure out how you're going to make your body capable of doing that? And if they said no, you'd say, well, that might be the problem then. You actually have to train for that, right? But we're so impoverished with our understanding of what meditation is, we don't realize that just because it's hard today doesn't mean it's wrong for us or that it's not helping us. Just like beginning to train or beginning to hike and climb a mountain, it's going to be painful. But you get something out of it. It's not like nothing's happening. It's just that what often happens, you get that little bit of attention and you all of a sudden see with a lot more clarity that you have a lot more thoughts, a lot more anxieties, a lot more sadness, a lot more chaos is going on inside than you thought prior to that. And that's not a pleasant experience. In the immediate sense, it's a very unpleasant experience. And this is another fundamental flaw that we have when we talk about meditation. People think meditation is about being happy and getting a blissful state of experience. It's not. It's about knowing the truth about yourself. Now, if you get to the top of the mountain, now you have that very beautiful view. So there's definitely that experience in meditation of having a very pleasant, all the way from a very nice, pleasant experience all the way to a transcendental experience. Those things are definitely a part of meditation, but it's not the goal. It's not the reason why you meditate. Those are just results. The truth, like Jesus states, the truth will set you free. But Jesus didn't say the truth is easy or that it's not painful. It can be extremely unpleasant. So we have to orientate, maybe think about, what do I really want? In the immediate sense, what am I willing to give up? Because all these beliefs that we have are like our little houses that we like to live in, and we shelter ourselves in them. They're very safe. They feel safe and secure. Certain habitual ways of thinking, they're what we know. They're what we go back to. We feel safe and secure with them, and try to get out of them, it's not a very pleasant experience. So we have to turn our mind over in these ideas again and again and again, because habitually we're going to go back to being cranky and moody and not wanting to meditate and all of these things. We have to continue to turn our mind, say, you know what really matters though is that I learn how to extract myself from these really lower states of mind so I can have just some clarity, so I can understand what's going on in my life. So as you begin to do that, Dianoia, the state of Dianoia, becomes more and more established. So you don't just one day magically pop into the state of Dianoia. It's better to state that little by little, you are establishing yourself in Dianoia. Being able to see with a lot of clarity the dualism of the mind. See the word Dianoia? There's a di in the front of it, meaning seeing both sides of an argument, like a dialogic, dialectic. It means seeing both sides. And you read the dialogues of Plato, you see the way he dissects the thoughts and the feelings of all the characters in those works, getting to the ground of something. You really can only engage in a dialectical manner of thinking, which means you see what it is, you see its opposite, and you see its synthesis with clarity. Thesis, antithesis, and its synthesis, you see it very clearly. You can navigate through all those concepts and ideas without a lot of problem. The reason why we fail to do that is because the vast majority of our consciousness is still in Pistis. And when we try to see it, what we're really seeing is a lot of irrational beliefs and fears and things about ourselves that beguile us. We're not really prepared for the reactions that come up, or we're not really aware of what's coming up within ourselves. So what we think is kind of an objective analysis really isn't. If we're constantly being identified with our emotions, if we're constantly identified with our pride or how good we look or how much prestige we have, or if we're always identified with states of fear and anxiety or with how depressed we feel, you can't really be achieving or you can't be established in the state of Dianoia having all of that. But little by little, you work yourself in the world of Dianoia to eliminate all of those problems. So when we go into meditation, we temporarily can elevate our state of consciousness. And then we can work on those lower levels that are still there. This is why Dianoia is related to that dialectical manner of understanding the world, and it's also related to self-cognizance. Cognizance means to cognize, to see yourself, to have to be self-aware, to be self-conscious. It's a weird phrase that we use, self-conscious. Sometimes we say, I got on stage and I got really self-conscious. And actually they're pointing towards, I got really anxious. Because we're so unfamiliar with being conscious about ourselves and our thoughts and our feelings that sometimes it makes us feel strange to be conscious of what's going on within ourselves. And the immediate reaction to that is, what can I do to put myself back into Pistis or Eikasia? Right? We have a lot of worries. A lot of people turn to alcohol or other drugs because they're anxious about the world. They want to submerge themselves. They want to get out of being self-conscious about their problems. They want to get that by having an escape by intoxicating themselves. So Dianoia is this idea of being extremely rational, truly rational. Dianoia means ratio. Ratio is to compare two things. Right? So a ratio is like 1/2, to compare two things. To be rational means to be able to compare things. So the supposed sort of promised land of any intellectual or academic is to be super hyper-rational, to see everything rationally. Certainly, that's better than seeing everything with just irrational beliefs. But the world of the Dianoia never really totally satisfies us as a human being. This Dianoia is just a stopgap between the final state, which is Nous. And Nous is direct intuition, to just know. Not based on prior phenomenological experiences in our lives, but to just know something. So from time to time, many of us feel like we've had that, a little, even if it's just a little spark of just knowing something. But any true rationalist, intellectual, again, believing that the consciousness is arriving from the brain only, would believe, well, intuition really, it doesn't really exist. You might think it's intuition, but it really isn't. They wouldn't really believe in that. So they really only stop themselves at Dianoia. But the reality is that Dianoia is like a false promised land for all those intellectuals because they don't find the peace and happiness that they're looking for. What they find is and never-ending competing carnival of different theories. Every theory is combated by its opposite, and the truth isn't anywhere to be found there. So many intellectuals, very rational, smart people, are more depressed than the people who are not there. According to surveys, the more intellectual you are, you're more likely to have depression, sometimes anxiety. It's because there's nothing really there. You can examine the world and take it apart and see things very rationally. It's good, but you'll find that there's no absolute truth in it. You never reach the absolute truth there. So you're always left with thirsting. And if you think that's it, there's nothing else to do in life, then it's a very depressing state. So to get out of that state, again, people will go to the bar. They don't believe in Nous. There's no way out of it. So you might as well just intoxicate yourself. But Nous really is the fourth state, the final state. This is the state that we're all looking to get to. First and foremost, we need to establish ourselves in Dianoia, which is not a simple or easy thing to do. It takes a lot of work. We shouldn't assume it, because everybody who's in Pistis believes they're in Dianoia already. They believe it, but who is for real? We can only, through a tremendous amount of work and reflection, raise our level of being. But just because we have a belief about how self-aware we are, doesn't mean that we actually are. And we know that we're not in Dianoia every time we get annoyed with other people. Every time that we have these discursive thoughts, these unhealthy beliefs or emotions or impulses to get even and hurt other people, to feel superior, to feel better than someone else, that's not the state of Dianoia. But we like to live in both fantasies. We like to believe we're in one state, and then we ignore that we have all this other stuff going on. So Nous is related to direct intuition, and we all have a connection to our inner God, our inner spirit. It's like an inner star that's shining its light on us. And every time we have a true impulse, a true piece of intuition, and we actually follow it, it brings us closer to the truth. But once again, it's so easy to mistake what is truly instinct, and we think it's intuition. Because instinct sort of is just there, and it feels so powerful and so strong. So we often confuse instinct with intuition. And this is exactly the great chasm that we need to cross. Because our very strong impulses are almost always instinctive. And we need to take all of that power and energy and bring it across to the other shore, to the other side of the river, which is where the power of intuition is. And little by little, again, this is a self-work. We have those impulses, and if we're meditating a lot, then that capacity, for a clear sky to see those stars shining on us. In meditation, it's a great analogy that the sky is like the state of your mind. And if you have a cloudy sky, that means you're very cloudy inside. And if it's hailing and thunderstorming and raining, it's a very chaotic mind. But when the clouds dissolve and you see something very bright shining on you, that's like having tremendous clarity. And in meditation, when you're persistent, you have these times when it's like the clouds dissolve and you're at a place where you're much more awake and aware and at peace because that light is shining. You're bathing yourself in that light, which is your own awareness, which is your own divine intelligence. And the more time you spend in that place, the more opportunities you're giving yourself to have these intuitive impulses. And just like those 3 wise men that follow the North Star to the Savior, inside of us, we need to be like that, always following our North Star. But in order to follow the North Star, we have to pay attention. We have to reflect and look within and find it. And the times that we want to do that the least are the times when we need to do it the most. Because when we're the most wrapped up in the challenges and the unpleasantness of life is when we need those states the most. And it's also when we forget the most to do it, or we don't believe in it. We just don't want to do it right now. But when we learn that every time the worse I'm feeling, the more I need to look within, then we'll begin to heal ourselves and pull ourselves up. So the state of Nous is extremely profound. Someone who's established in the state of Nous, and by established I mean there is none of those other levels active. If you're truly established in the state of Nous, then you're like a prophet or an avatar. You're a type of individual directly connected to divinity, like Jesus or Moses or the Buddha. So Nous is almost out of our understanding, but we can get there. First, we need to be establishing ourselves in Dianoia. The more we're establishing ourselves in Dianoia, the more we can begin to get those intuitive impulses towards Nous. So Samael and Vior states about Eikasia. Eikasia is ignorance, human cruelty, barbarism, exceedingly profound sleep, a brutal and instinctive world, an infrahuman state. Regarding Pistis, he states, Pistis is the world of opinions and beliefs. Pistis is belief, prejudices, sectarianism, fanaticism, theories in which there does not exist any type of direct perception of the truth. Pistis is the consciousness of the common level of humanity. Dianoia is the intellectual revision of beliefs, analysis, conceptual synthesis, cultural, intellectual consciousness, scientific thought, etc. Finally, Nous. Nous is perfect awakened consciousness. Nous is the state of Toria, profound, perfect interior illumination. Nous is the legitimate objective clairvoyance. Nous is intuition. So let's now talk a little bit more about levels of truth. Those 4 states of consciousness are inhabited along what we call the tree of life. And the tree of life is a symbol that we use related to the Hebrew Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, because it is a very powerful tool to understand the various parts of ourself. We see at the top 3, a triangle at the top, which is the Trinity. And below that, we have 7 Sephiroth, 7 aspects. And 7 plus 3 is 10. So we have a total of 10 aspects here. And each one of these aspects contains its own relative truth. So what we are, like I said before, we commonly carry a very naive understanding of what our self is. We're just thinking we're this self, and I said this, I did that, I got angry, I got happy over here, I like this, I don't like that. And we're very undefined. It's like this box that we've labeled ourselves, but we haven't actually looked what's inside. Now, using a tool like this, we can separate all those layers. Because at the bottom, we have the physical body, which we're often very identified with. We instinctually and reflexively, look at ourselves in the mirror and we think, that's me. I am myself. And we do whatever we do to, take care of ourselves. We can be very identified with ourselves, identified with our appearance. But more than that, there's a relative truth, of course. We carry this body around. There's a relative truth that if you eat the wrong types of foods, it's going to impact your state of mind a little bit. If you don't have good nutrition, there is a relationship there with your mental health. We know that if we skip a meal, sometimes our blood sugar gets low and we just get a little more irritated, for example. So learning how to take care of our body, learning how to keep it relatively healthy, eating the best food that we can is good. But there are a lot of people who go very extreme and think that if they can take their body with perfect health, that is a way to, find happiness. But the body is going to die anyway. We're only here temporarily. The physical body is just like a pair of clothing. And every pair of clothing you eventually gets worn out. And you throw it out. And that's what our body is like. While we have it, we should use it like an extremely precious, beautiful gift. Because it is exactly that. We should take care of it. A physical body has its vital energy, its chemistry, its biology, its energy. And many traditions talk about the vital body, the body of chi, the energetic aspect of our body. And when we're in meditation, a lot of times we sit down in meditation, the first thing we need to do is relax our physical body. So maybe we're told we should sit in a very good posture. So we sit and we try to relax, but we have pains. Our body's in pain. Or we try to sit and not move, but out of nowhere, our face starts to itch. Or some part of ourselves gets irritated. It wasn't irritated before, when we were not trying to relax, and now we're trying to be at peace, and suddenly different parts of our body are irritated. A lot of times it has to do with our vital body, our energy, being very chaotic. And what stirs up that energy is other levels of, the levels of our emotion and the levels of our mind spinning. They stir up a lot of energy and even into our biology. And we know that if we have anxieties or different ways that our emotions can actually impact our digestion, or they can impact, even physically, you can get ailments really because of stress. So you see how those levels of ourself can impact the energetic level. And then when we go to meditate, our body we just almost can't relax. So beyond our vitality, which of course, the very center or root or most powerful aspect of our vitality is related to our sexual center. And beyond our energetic body, our vital body, we have our vehicles of emotion and mind, which are our thoughts and feelings. And as I was saying before, normally if we try to relax, those aspects of ourselves are now becoming more apparent. Especially if we close our eyes, we're taking the attention away from the external world. We're trying to kind of just relax and see what's going on inside. Immediately, we might have these emotions, thoughts appearing. And this is a very, very difficult aspect when we're talking about meditation. It's difficult for people to extract themselves or see what's beyond that, because our emotions and our thoughts are like tempting serpents in us. They're always tempting us to feel that way. We're sort of fascinated. We don't think about it as fascination, but when we're afraid of something and we can't stop thinking about it, it's because we have a fear which is instinctual, because we don't feel safe or secure. And then our mind takes that and tries to work with it and pull it apart into pieces and see, where do I solve this? Put it back together in a different way, and maybe if I do this, and maybe if I do that. And it lays it all out. It doesn't see a very good solution, so it does it again. And it does it again. And that's us going around and around. And we're identified with that sense of insecurity. Because when you say, just stop thinking about it, it doesn't really work that way. You can't just stop thinking about it normally. If you're very identified with it, it doesn't work that way. The way through that is to recognize, to cognize, to see, okay, what is really beyond this intellectual rumination? What's the emotional content? A lot of times it's related to fear, insecurity. And you might say, oh, well, that's irrational. I shouldn't be that way. So that's better to recognize that, but you're still stuck with that. You're still stuck with something that, I don't want this to be the case. I'm recognizing that it is the case. I have something here that's like a ball of energy. Maybe it's fundamentally not very rational. To move through that, you have to keep your attention on the fact that it's something there, that you can observe its qualities. Observing, just like sinking into those waters, sometimes you just have to be very still to see how deep that goes. But a lot of times we have an aversion to wanting to sink into that unknown. Whatever that might be, that fear, that state of mind that is anxious. Because if you believe that you are fundamentally that emotion, that insecurity, that fear, that pride, whatever it is, you will not want to sink down into it. You don't want to find out what's underneath that. A lot of people are afraid that underneath that might be something even worse. Or I don't really want to know what's at the bottom of it. There's like a fear there, a fear of the fear. We have to get through that, because you are not that. In essence, you are not that ball of energy. You have the ability to go through it. But if we're sort of anxious, we don't actually want to look at it straight on. We don't want to sink into it. We want to avoid it in any sense. You won't get through it, because beyond the mind is our volition. Is our willpower. You have to want to move through it. But it's like a wave. It's like this huge wave coming, and you're like, this wave's going to crush me. I don't know what's going to happen. This wave's going to crush me, and I'm going to go tumbling in the waters, and I don't know which way's up, and I don't know which way's down. So a lot of times we sense that, and we just don't have the will to go into it. We just do not want to go into it. If you believe that you could be crushed and annihilated inside of meditation, then you believe that meditation can kill you or something. But if you just sit and you are present and aware and seeing that avalanche just take you on. The emotion feels like doom is impending. Someone once told me, I look at myself and I just feel this doom. And yeah, your mind is doomed. You have to be aware and just see that. Those very strong emotions just come straight through you, because eventually they will calm down and you will be on the other side of it. Now, if you've never experienced that, then you have to have some type of belief about it, if you've never experienced it. But if you have any trust in these teachings, then that's the technique, is that when faced with that intense emotion, to just see it straight through. And of course, appealing to some higher power, praying, if you're really, really having a difficult time, invoke God, pray, ask for something more, because you can make it through those difficult emotions, and then you find yourself more established with this will, this volition. Now you may not, this all happens in degrees and in a gradient. I'm not saying that you'll immediately be perfectly in a state of perfect willpower. But eventually, if you persist, a master of meditation gets to a state of perfect willpower, in which case, in that state, the mind and the emotions and the physical body and the physical body's energy totally dormant, like a sleeping animal. And you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And you now have perfect serenity and direction of what you want to do with your consciousness. In the beginning, we just have to recognize that no matter how strong our emotions and thoughts are, it is not what we are. But again, me saying it and one person hearing it just once, it might not really connect, but to turn your mind over into that again and again and again and keep going back. So why don't I trust the fact that I am my own awareness? Why don't I trust that? Why do I keep entangling myself in these ruminations? Well, beyond our volition, which is related to the sphere of Tifereth, beyond that we start getting into divine consciousness. Because beyond Tifereth is Geburah, where we find a source of intuition. Also, Geburah is related to power and strength. So, our very, we could say, human consciousness, if it's very pure, it has a volition. It can do its own will, our own human will. But the power behind that is always God. And that's related to Geburah. And the human will, if it's doing the will of God perfectly, it's seeing those higher levels of consciousness and then acting on it. Because God is our inner divinity is a type of perfection related to our inner divinity. We have a type of perfection inside of ourselves. The problem is we don't recognize it. We don't see it. We don't know how to make it out. We confuse our intuitions with our instincts. So beyond our own will, we have our inner Geburah, our strength, our power, our intuition, and beyond that is Hesed, which is truly our inner spirit. And Hesed means mercy. Hesed is also related to love and compassion. And when we have overwhelming serenity and love and compassion, we are vibrating with these higher truths. And of course, beyond that, we have the Trinity, which is beyond even our inner spirit, in which all of these very divine principles and cosmic principles are present within ourselves. In any particular practice of meditation, someone can elevate themselves all the way up to the very top, Keter, which is Father. That's possible in any particular meditation. In any particular meditation, someone could get stuck at the level of the vital body and feel the twitches and itches and the pains and not be able to get beyond that. So we need to find our particular truth in meditation. So we might be able to achieve a state of mind, a state of truth beyond our mind and emotion for that particular meditation. And because we're able to achieve that, we're able to work on those states of consciousness, establishing them, those 4 states, in our life. And the way that our life unfolds, whether good or neutral or unpleasant, we take all of those things and we bring them into meditation. And this is how, step by step, we balance our life by going within ourselves and finding our inner truth within a meditation, and then we take that type of experience and live our life, live a deeper truth in our life, achieving Dianoia and Nous. So this tree of life I have here is a little bit incomplete because really below is all these states of consciousness which are inferior, which would be related to Eikasia and Pistis. That's our subconsciousness. And sometimes we say subconsciousness, unconsciousness, infraconsciousness. And subconsciousness means things that are just below our consciousness. It's just right below. Small amount of effort, you can begin to see some of those things. Unconsciousness is much deeper, and really, although it's very, very, very present, and it takes up a lot of our inner activity, it takes a directed amount of work to begin to see into the unconscious. And beyond that is the infraconscious, which is related to our animal instinctual nature. It's extremely infrahuman. But all of that, through our Gnostic work, we eliminate. We bring all of that into consciousness. So just like that analogy where they say a iceberg, most of the content of the iceberg is below the water, and only a small amount is above the water. And related to our consciousness, most of our consciousness is one of these types, sub, un, or infraconscious. And we live on a small little layer, carrying ourselves. When someone says our name, we know to respond to our name, and we have our life thinking that we're so self-knowledgeable, but really, most of all of our self, we don't even know about. So these layers of unconsciousness, we often put them below Malkut, but in a sense, they encompass our emotions and our mind. And they really, our willpower, our volition is trapped inside our emotions and our mind. That's why it's just not easy to do some things. Some things are extremely easy, especially when they're self-fulfilling or feeding our desires. It'd be really easy to do some things. And other things that we know that they're very healthy for us, and we know that they might even be part of our goals, but it's just not easy to do them. We just have a resistance. We find other things to do instead of doing that. It's because the willpower to just do it simply and easily is trapped in our ego, which is subconscious, unconscious, or infraconscious. So in terms of these 4 states, in Buddhist philosophy, they have, in the Yogachara school, there is 3 modes of knowledge, or 3 types of truth. The lowest one being the world of fantasy, parakalpita. And again, it's imagined reality based on ignorance. So very much related to Eikasia, fantasy. Images, projections, conjurings of things, but they don't have anything to do with objective truth. They are fantasy. They don't have a substantial truth. And often this is symbolized or allegorized as seeing a rope in a occluded or shady corner, like if you opened up a closet or a shed, you saw a snake in the corner of the shed, but really it's just a rope. You see it and you instinctually react as if it is a snake. So it's coiled, like maybe it looks like that. But really it's just a rope. That quandary, that paradox happens in our mind all the time. So the analogy is something you can think about physically, but really we see things in our mind all the time. Oh, I know why he's doing that. Or why did they do that? And you think of these things. We see something and we think we build up some fantasy about some scenario. People are out to get me, or why did they do this? Or why am I always, why does this always have to happen to me? All sorts of narratives we tell ourselves. And it's really just, we saw something and then we projected our own fantasy on top of it. And it's a fantasy that usually elaborates some larger narrative we like to tell about ourselves. I'm always the persecuted one. I'm always the one who has to be responsible. Why is this always happening? All these things we tell ourselves that's going on in our mind, we have to analyze them and see, is it a projection? Do the facts of what's actually happening fit this narrative that I'm superimposing on top of it? When we begin to do that, that's moving into this second mode of truth, which is called paratantra, which is the world of phenomena. Again, this is beginning to actually see how the world is unfolding in front of you without fantasy, but seeing that all things are chained together in causes and effects, and that all things that are existent came to be existent because of many different factors. They're composed or are composite of many things. And moreover, all things are composite. All things are composed of other things. And everything that is composite breaks down. There is no thing that was brought together that doesn't fall apart. And that's not a sad thing, that's just the truth. Everything will fall apart. But if you believe that the world of phenomena, how things come together, if you think that's the final truth, that feels like a very depressing truth. But to live, to have the mode of paratantra, in this sense, tantra means continuum, chain of cause and effect. To actually see the world in that way, this is actually to see the rope as the rope, so to speak. To see things rationally, to see it as a cause and effect. Things are happening because of a series or a chain of causes and events, and things don't just happen for no reason. The world of paratantra, though, goes a lot further than just rationality, because you might say, I don't know why this happened, I don't see any reason. But the world of paratantra goes into many of those upper sephiroth, into layers and dimensions of space that we're not normally aware of, that are not just related to the physical world. Because causes and conditions are related to the world, the internal worlds, the superior worlds, nirvana, heaven, whatever you want to talk about. Those are also worlds that are related to cause and effect. And this is another thing that Jesus stated. Heaven and earth shall pass away, is what Jesus states. Meaning heaven was created, heaven will pass away. He also said, but the word of God will not pass away. And that's related to the highest truth, which is this absolute truth, paramartha. Ultimate truth, which is unknowable to our normal state of mind. It's only knowable to that pure consciousness, that pure awareness, when it unites with divinity. This is related to the emptiness, the void, the illuminated void, transcendental experience. A type of experience which cannot be conveyed with any words because the words would just disfigure it. This is that type of universal cosmic intelligence where subject and object are merged as one. The rope and the experiencer are the same effulgent beingness, which is that illuminated void. A spacious, unbounded, or limitless consciousness and light, within which everything possible is there in potential. Anything that could be created is created out of that. That's a state, not just a philosophical truth, but it's a state that we can experience. And this is the very highest levels of meditative transcendent experience. We're going to end with this quote from the Gospel of Thomas. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are children of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you live in poverty, and you are that poverty. Truly, we are impoverished, searching. Whether we know it or not, we're always searching for our inner truth, whether we think we are or not. Because we're always impelled to act. We have these reactions to the way the world is happening, the way the people in our life are treating us. We have these activities going on. And we react and we respond in whatever way comes up in our mind. But it's all based upon this core yearning to know the truth about the world and about ourselves. When we don't know about ourselves, we live in a psychological poverty. This is not about physical poverty. This is about our psychological poverty. We're very poor within ourselves. They say you should be poor in spirit, but we're very rich in our mind. We can't enter into those higher states of mind being very enriched, very puffed out, and all of these ideas that we have.